All right. So today I have the pleasure of being joined by Matt Hill on the show. Matt, thanks so much for taking the time to be with us today.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Of course. So, where I'd love to get the podcast started, as I was kind of doing research for the podcast and your background, one thing that kind of stood out to me that was interesting about your background is kind of the dynamic from, you studied at UPenn, and of course, correct me if I'm wrong with any of this, and studied film. And I think it's an interesting kind of pivot from film, which is also, of course, a very creative art, to becoming a software engineer, which in and of itself is also a creative art, right? But I'm curious to kind of hear your perspective. Yeah, what inspired that change, and what led you to go from film to software engineering?
Yeah, you're right. It's a massive pivot, so to speak. Not that I was ever in the film industry; I never worked in it, but I did study it formally, which is not something people go to UPenn for. Yeah, UPenn is
Yeah.
notorious for Wharton, which is a world-renowned business school. I got accepted to Wharton, and I went to the Arts and Sciences School instead because I didn't want to be an investment banker, and that's what you go to Wharton for. But I didn't know what I wanted to do. My first major that I selected was PPE. It was called um, politics, political science, and economics.
Mm.
So that was my first major. Was this trio major of politics, political science, and economics? Or sorry, not politics. Philosophy, political science, and economics. Politics and political science are the same
Yeah.
thing. So that's my interest, right? It's philosophy, politics, economics. I love it. I also love art. I like to paint. I'm very into film. I'm not so into music. I do like coding. I love coding, and that is an art as well, or at least it can be. And for me, it is for sure. Um, but yeah, I liked a lot of things, and like a lot of 18, 19 year olds, you have no idea what you actually want to do. Um, and I found out pretty quickly. So I waited till the final moment to like declare a major. It was like the middle of my sophomore year. I still hadn't declared anything formally. And by then, I was very disillusioned with not only college, but in particular, schools like Penn, which is like a notoriously elitist, Ivy League university. I came from Aurora, Colorado public school system. And so it was just like culture shock. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. And I was so out of place. Um, and I just didn't know what I wanted to do. I was totally out of place. I I hated it. I hated college and I hated Penn, and I was lost and confused and angry, and I, to be honest, chose a major that would afford me the most amount of uh, free time and choice. So film at Penn is not film production. Yes, I did some film production courses and made some shorts and wrote a bunch of screenplays, and but mostly film at Penn is like film analysis, film history.
Mm.
It's like film the business, film the art, right? Um, and so it was easy. It was gave me a lot of extra credits to play with, where I could like take philosophy courses and economics courses that were not core to my major. So it was the path of least resistance in terms of affording me the greatest amount of freedom, and I used it to learn the things I wanted to learn, uh, and get through college to survive without, to be honest, like destroying myself, because I was quite like I said, just an angry 20-year-old who didn't like where he was and didn't know who he was. And so film, that's one side. The other side of that coin, and is something I uphold to this day, is that even then I was very, very political, even though I didn't know what I was talking about. I was very
Mm.
uneducated in politics, but I was very interested in it. And I understood that propaganda was an incredibly, incredibly important tool of statecraft and politics, and that the primary medium of propaganda was film. And so my interest in film was less the art form of film and more the tool of the cinematic medium for the use of political propaganda. That really fascinated me, and I studied it. And one of my finals for my senior thesis was actually on a film um, called The Battle of Algiers, which is a incredibly powerful movie that was used by Algerian revolutionaries. It circulated amongst the ranks of the revolutionaries to both inspire and instruct their efforts in expelling the French occupiers from that country, I believe in the 70s. And it like that was my interest in college, was like studying the 70s Battle of Algiers and how film helped the revolutionaries defeat the French. And so that's kind of my mentality. It's kind of my approach to the world. I love this high-level thinking, politics, economics. I love history. I love studying war and revolutions. And that carried through into all my subsequent endeavors. So it may look like I'm doing something very, very different than, studying film at Penn. A lot of the reasons that I was doing that and a lot of my interests have carried through just fine. It's just the particular things that I do on a daily basis are night and day different.
Yeah, it's a really interesting story, and I think when you explain it like that, it makes a lot more sense because I think, as you mentioned, right, you can kind of look on it maybe on your resume and see, film major at Penn, and like you mentioned, I actually grew up right outside of Philadelphia, so I'm very familiar with UPenn and kind of that area. There's
Yeah.
also a school that I was thinking about going to, but I kind of had a bit the opposite experience you had. I went from Philadelphia to California, which is a bit also kind of the opposite
Culture shock.
culture
Yeah.
shock, right? But when you explain kind of your interest in history, you're passionate about history, you're passionate about politics, and how that feeds into film, how that feeds into narrative, I think that's super interesting. And so when you kind of walked away from Penn, when you graduated, what or actually let's take a step back. I think what's interesting also to talk about is kind of your interest in that, right? Like you kind of mentioned, you're a bit of an angry 20-year-old and always have had strong beliefs. Has that always been something that's been pretty innate in you? Because I think that's also something that I see throughout Bitcoin, right? Is like people who are well versed on history and people who, have strong beliefs about certain things.
So yes, to some. Let me exit out of my messenger here so we're not getting beeps. So I have always been a very intense person. And maybe that's an easy thing to say, but I sort of have the receipts. I just don't do anything half speed.
Mm.
Very intense personality, always been that way. It's not something I learned. I sort of came out intense and had to learn to, temper this in certain ways because I can become obsessed. I can get obsessive and frustrated about things if they're not going the way that I want them to. I very much like to bend the world to my will, as I'm sure many of us do, but I really try and I get frustrated when it doesn't work. So I didn't know how to channel that. I didn't know where to put that. A lot of that went into athletics. So even when I was 5, I told my mom I wanted to do taekwondo. I didn't say taekwondo. I wanted to be a Ninja Turtle, and she found a taekwondo gym, that would take a 5-year-old, and I got really intense really quickly. And just so I was lucky enough to have the Grand Master who ran that dojo was the head of the United States Taekwondo Federation. He was the president of it. He was a trainer in the South Korean Army. He was a 9th degree Grand Master. He was just like an amazing, like literally Mr. Miyagi type. Like the guy was incredible. And not only did I fall in love with him, but I also fell in love with Taekwondo. I fell in love with the process of self-improvement, which is really what Taekwondo represents, because it's technically a martial art, but it's really not designed for combat. Taekwondo is much more about discipline, mental discipline and focus. And I just fell in love with this idea of like improving myself, perfecting myself. And I ended up being the youngest kid in Colorado to ever receive a black belt. I was 7 years old when I got my black belt, and it was the youngest black belt Master Cho had ever given out as well. And I went on to be the national runner-up in the Junior Olympics in Taekwondo, and I won 7 state titles. And like I literally was like, good. I was good at Taekwondo, and I was very intense about it. And so anyway, that's sort of receipt number one, right? And that's how my life has been ever since. And I've channeled it into athletics. I started golf when I was 10 and did the little junior PGA tour by the time I was 12 and was I was good, but I never got as into it as I did with Taekwondo. And then in high school, I did, football, basketball, track and field, cross country, golf. I played all these for the high school teams. Varsity lettered in all of them, and ended up being a multiple state champion in track and field, both at the team level and at the individual level and at the relay level. I set school records and ultimately got recruited to Penn to run track. But also I was, valedictorian, straight A's in high school. So anyway, I like to compete. I like to win. I'm intense. I like to improve. And I'm obsessed with all that process. And as I've gotten older, it has channeled increasingly towards politics. Right, I'm very, very fascinated by, interested in, and love to participate in political endeavors. And so, Start9 is inherently political, right? Sure, it's a technology company. We make computers. We make an open source operating system, but it's not that we impose politics onto it. It's that it is inherently political. If we achieve what we're trying to do, it will change the political structures of this planet, right? Not just us, but us and others, as is Bitcoin, right? Bitcoin is inherently political. You don't get to invent open source, open, permissionless, decentralized, sound money and have it not be political. Like you're literally rugging the entire power structures of the planet. So, but I like it. I like that. Like I'm into that. That scope of life. I like playing in the big boy box. Not the kids section.
Yeah, no, it's super interesting. And where did that? And just so when you graduated from Penn, switching over to software engineering, because I think that step is it's courageous in a sense, right? Because you're going from something that is completely opposite of opposite in a lot of ways of what you studied, to tech and to kind of this field of technology. How was that step made? What was that thought process, and like what were the motivations behind that?
So I'll do like a brief background and then get to the specific question of how I got into quote tech, right? Writing code.
Yeah.
But so I grew up in a bakery. My father owned a bread and bagel bakery in Colorado, 30 years, won every award you can win. I mean, it was like a renowned local business. And I grew up from the age of, since I can remember, since I was able to reach my hands up to the top of the counter, I grew up in a small business setting. I was helping customers. I was, rolling bread and bagels by hand, covered in flour as a little kid. And as I got older, I became, was actually producing and like contributing, as opposed to just kind of running around and causing chaos for all the other employees. But eventually took that over after college. That was what I did after graduating Penn. Was I came back to Denver and I took over the family bakery, and I went into an expansion phase and was very successful with that. Doubled the size of the company within a year, and it attracted some buyers. And my dad wanted out, and I wasn't ready to commit to being a baker for the rest of my life. So I told him to sell it and take this money and retire, and he did. And so that was a nice little success story and ending for him. And I, got out of that business, and did a lot of other things in kind of to scrap in the meantime. I mean, I was a track and field coach for high school for 7 years. I waited tables at a restaurant. All of this was like part-time stuff, but I waited tables at a restaurant for 4 years on and off to earn some money. I did private tutoring for high school students and college students. I drove for Uber in the early days when that was coming about. I helped a friend of mine bootstrap a fence contracting company that is now one of the largest fence contractors in Colorado. So I was building fences for a while, like not just helping him, on the business side, but I was literally out digging holes and building fences. Um, and then eventually I started a plastics recycling company with my brother where we were doing like large scale industrial plastics recycling. And that started out of the back of a budget truck where we were literally driving around Colorado, picking up scrap plastic and brokering it to recyclers up in Oregon. And within a year, we had a 40,000 square foot facility in Colorado where we were ourselves collecting plastic from around the country, shredding it, grinding it, cleaning it, and reselling it as a newborn commodity. So I learned a lot about like the manufacturing industry at a large scale, including mechanical engineering, because I helped engineer a lot of our lines that we put together to shred and clean and melt down this plastic. And I learned a lot about recycling and plastics recycling and materials and commodities in general. And ultimately, my brother and I had kind of a falling out there. Like, it's not always good to do business with family. And we just had very different visions and strategies and personalities. And there was a lot of collision. And so I moved on. I decided that I loved plastics recycling. It was a great industry, a lot of opportunity, tons of room for growth, but I wanted the relationship with my brother and my nieces, and I wanted my health and sanity. And so I moved on from that. He continued with it and has since become one of the largest plastics recyclers in the country. But I moved on and went back to scrapping for my meals, doing a bunch of different things, and ultimately came up with an idea for an app. And this is where tech comes in. So I came up with an idea for an app, that would, I was familiar with Uber, and like many people thought it was this revolutionary idea of, labor markets, of connecting supply and demand for labor in this efficient way, right? Where an app, rather than a human, is a broker of labor, right? There's somebody who needs a ride. There's somebody who has a ride. Let's connect them efficiently using technology. Brilliant idea. And it became Uber. And everybody wanted to be the Uber of this and the Uber of that after that. Well, I am a meta thinker. I always go, okay, well, like, what's the abstraction here? Rather than just being the Uber of a particular thing, is there a meta play that can be made? And so I came up with this idea of a more generalized labor market platform rather than an app. It would be more of a platform where basically anyone could vet and curate pools of qualified labor for different specific activities, and then broker those pools of labor to anyone in the world who needed them, right? A simple example of this would be like if I knew as a high school coach, I knew a bunch of great babysitters, right? These were all like 17, 18-year-old kids. I knew them personally. They were great with kids, and I brokered them to my brother. My brother's just like, "Hey, you know any babysitters?" I'm like, "Do I ever?" Right? And so I was like, "Wow, I could scale that up. Like, what if I, put these babysitters into a pool of, I'll call them Matt's babysitters, and I've interviewed them, I know them, I vouch for them, right? Like they're my babysitters, even though I didn't have any kids, right? These are just people I knew could babysit. And then I turn to the world and I go, hey, world, I got babysitters. And if you trust me, you should trust them because I vetted them. So I have just become the Uber of babysitters in my neighborhood and my city, right? It's like a tiny little pop-up Uber platform where anyone could curate pools of labor for anything and broker them to anyone, putting their own reputation on the time, effectively connecting supply and demand, just like Uber does. And so I got really obsessed with this idea because it could be, the applications of it were endless, right? I mean, there's so many different ways that something like that could be used by businesses, individuals, communities, and I wanted to build it. So I went down the whole startup route, okay, I have this idea. I think I understand it, how to talk about it, how to sell it. I have a ton of experience in business, right? From all the way from management to accounting to just understanding, I grew up in a small business. I had started a plastics recycling company. I had a lot of experience and felt very competent to do something like this. Problem? I had no experience in tech. I had no idea how to build an app. So I started pounding pavement. I went to the developer meetups in Colorado and was just like, hey, I got this idea. I started creating like these charts, diagrams to like show the network, which was effectively a decentralized network for brokering labor, right?
Right.
And ultimately I go to the Denver developer something or another meetup and I do this presentation. And it's got this big chart on it and showing how like anyone can spin up a labor pool and anyone can then join the labor pool if they're qualified and then they can broker those laborers to this people. And I had a chart. And it just so happens that the guy who ran this coding meetup, who was a skilled developer himself, was also a crazy ardent Bitcoiner. Okay. And I had never heard of Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And at the time I was campaigning for Ron Paul and buying gold. Okay. Like that was my political
Yeah.
strategy, economic strategy, was, libertarianism and gold. And so anyway, this guy comes up to me after the presentation and he's just like, this is something I am interested in. He goes, you just designed a decentralized system for labor markets. He's like, which is really, really interesting. Have you ever heard of Bitcoin? And I'm like, no. And he goes, there's an ATM. Go buy some and then I'll tell you about it. So I did. I walked over to the ATM, and I was really excited because like the guy who led the meetup, right, was interested in my project, so I was going to do anything for him. So I went over there and I put $100 in the ATM and bought my first $100 of Bitcoin right on the spot. But anyway, so he orange pilled me, and I got him involved in my project, and so he decided to take it on and build out the entire app. During this process, I came to learn a lot about him. He was not a great developer. Hindsight, I know this now. He was okay. Most of what made him not a good developer was that he was just insanely lazy. He was not a hard worker, and he took advantage of my lack of ability to verify his work to basically just kind of he just wasn't that interested in it. He was getting paid, he was doing his Bitcoin stuff, he was like working on this on the side. Meanwhile, I'm like ferociously trying to get this built. It's like something I love, and I'm like, why is it taking so long? What's going on? I had no idea, no ability to vet him. So finally he goes, I need help. I need somebody else. And so I was like, fuck, I'm spending my own money to do this. And so I was like, all right, I'll get you an assistant, So who do you want to hire? And he goes, I got a friend over here. His name's Chris Guida. I don't know if you're familiar with Chris. So Chris comes in, who's also at the time already into Bitcoin, Python developer mostly, but just overall a very smart and skilled developer. And Chris also falls in love with my idea and starts to like really work on it. And eventually Josh quits, the original guy quits, and Chris and I, so now Chris becomes the CTO, right? And by then I had gotten so angry about my own incompetence, about my own like inability to push the project forward, that I was dependent on somebody else and that I couldn't even verify their work, that I started to like throw my hat in the ring, right? And I told Chris, I was like, I'm going to look over your shoulder. Like, I want to learn how to code, right? Like, cause this is killing me that I can't do it myself. And Chris was very open to this. He was awesome. He was just like, yeah, man, I'll show you what I'm doing. So I gradually kind of just dove in. And it started with, changing the color of the screen using some CSS. And then it became, okay, I can work with HTML. And then I started doing the online coding challenges. And I got obsessed. I got absolutely obsessed. Chris ultimately moved on. Chris was killing himself, not only doing Work Blast, but just in life. He needed to go take care of himself. And so very good friends, we shook hands and parted ways. And I then took over the project as the sole member of the company, was just like, okay, I'll build it. And I was nowhere near ready to do something like that. But luckily, with all my little side hustles, I could keep the money coming in. And I had just met my then future wife, and she was even then just like totally got me and understood what I needed. And I pretty much locked myself in a room and lived off of peanut butter and jellies that she made, force fed me. For 8 months, it took me to go from zero to full launch of this product. And I became a junior developer during that time, just pounding my head against the wall until it all made sense. And I launched it. So iOS, Android, full backend, launched it and iterated that thing over the course of many months. It was a free app to begin with, and I had no idea how I was going to monetize, and just ended up, but it was like my dive into coding, right? And so I was trial by fire. I had to figure it out for the sake of the survival of a idea that I loved, and I did. And it, to this day, is a popular app on iOS and Android. I put zero effort into it now. It runs itself. I'm probably going to shut it down because it just costs me every month. But it's used by like Southwest Airlines uses it for all their employees to trade their shifts if they have, if somebody like wants to get rid of their shift, they push a button, it broadcasts it to all the people who are qualified. First person to claim it gets it, shuts down, notifies the managers. It's a very, very useful app. It's been picked up by Old Navy. A bunch of gyms use it. Schools, I have universities using it. And it's just like, I can't figure out a way to turn on the money. And even if I could, I don't have time for this. What I'm doing at Start9 is way more important. It has all my attention. And so I'm probably going to shut it down, even though, honestly, if somebody picked it up and wanted to run with it, they could probably be a very profitable endeavor if they just had the time and capital to put into it. But so because that wasn't something that could pay me, I had to go do something else. But now I had this added skill set, right? I knew how to code. I wasn't a senior developer or anything, but I knew how to code, and I understood the process now. I understood like all the concepts and the process of bringing a software application to market. So I wanted to go like, use that. I also was super into Bitcoin by this time. Throughout that process, I had been thoroughly orange pilled. And so I was looking for something at the intersection of all my skill sets, which was basic entrepreneurship, management, technology, coding, and Bitcoin, which for me right out of the gate was a very political thing. And so I was looking for something basically in Bitcoin where I could work as a engineering manager, and ideally in a startup, because I love startups and I love building, I love entrepreneurship. And so I was very, very lucky. I found an opportunity in Colorado with a startup called Salt. Salt is a crypto-backed lending platform, right? Similar to like BlockFi or any of the others that I'm not even sure who's around anymore, but you put up Bitcoin as collateral, you get a fiat loan, you make payments on the loan. If you fail to make payments or your collateral drops, beneath a liquidation threshold, we have it. We can shave some off and sell it. Bitcoin is perfect collateral, okay? Yeah. And so the people who founded this company had the idea of using Bitcoin as collateral for fiat loans. And they were like promoting this idea all over Colorado. And I went to a libertarian meetup where the CEO was talking about it. And I pulled him aside afterwards and I was like, where are you guys at? Like, how much progress have you made towards this vision? And he's like, we, have an idea, we have a website, we have a team, but we do not have a product. We have no software product to speak of. And I was like, bring me on. I can't build the whole thing myself. But I was like, I totally get what you're doing. I'm super into it. I do know I'm an engineer. I know how to code. But even more, I know how to build teams. I'm a coach. I'm a team builder. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a small business owner. Like, I can help you bootstrap this company, right? And they didn't have a CTO. So he brought me on in a project manager role, and my project was to bootstrap the engineering department of the company. I was effectively the acting CTO of this company. Pretty much all the technology and product decisions that got made from then forward were made by me with the approval of the CEO and founding team. But I basically built Salt from a product perspective. And in the process, built out an incredible engineering team. I mean, just a rock star team. And we really built a great product over there. When I was at Salt, all the Bitcoin collateral was held in a multi-sig, no rehypothecation. We had great monitoring and notification technology to monitor, the price. against the value of the loan and issue margin calls when needed, and have, streamlined flows for borrowers to cure their loan by depositing more collateral or liquidating. I mean, it was awesome. We built like a really cool machine over there. And I continued my, progress towards becoming a engineer. Like I started to get really good at Salt, right? I kind of knew what I was doing with WorkBlast when I built that, but when I went to Salt, I like started to become like a good developer. And not only that, but surrounded myself with awesome developers, and eventually was formally named CTO of Salt. So once I had, call a duck, I was the acting CTO forever. So eventually I was formally the CTO. But by then, Salt had turned a very dark corner, in my opinion, in terms of like the CEO and the founding team was really shitcoining, to put it lightly, right? They were just like, they were on the Ripple bandwagon and and they wanted to take everything as collateral, and they had launched a token as well. They had raised money using a token sale, and the token was supposed to have utility, but it didn't. And so they wanted to spend all their time imbuing this token with utility rather than building a business. And they wanted to imbue it with utility because they wanted to, avoid SEC fines and stay out of jail. And I didn't participate in the token sale. I just wanted to build a crypto-backed lending business, right? A Bitcoin-backed lending business, and they wanted to sell tokens and justify them to the SEC. So me and the CEO really could not see eye to eye. And eventually I left there in a pretty kind of negative way, right? There was kind of like a abrupt exit moment. And I took the engineering team with me. So I had built that team. They worked for me. They did not work for Salt. I don't think the CEO understood that. So when I left, the core of Salt's engineering team left with me. Best, smartest people I've ever worked with. And I said to them as we all left and they decided to leave, I was like, I don't know what we're going to do, guys, but I guarantee you whatever we do is going to be high integrity, high value. We're going to love it. It's going to be important, and we're going to succeed because you're the best people I've ever known. And so they left with me. And what came out of that was Start9.
Wow. Yeah, no, that's, the whole story is really interesting. I think from, the moment of, I think the whole work blast, of course, story with kind of, like you said, learning by doing and building that yourself, especially after the other co-founders or the people you brought on to help you kind of left. I think that's, the best way to learn, right? And then taking that experience and building out Salt Lending, I think, it's a really unique and interesting story. And I think it's interesting to always hear these stories about, people who, especially, now you're the CEO of another new company, which we'll get to, or not new company, but of Start9, which we'll get to in a bit. And so it was interesting to kind of hear the background and hear the story of how that came to be. So, at this point in time, from what I'm understanding, you've been exposed to, before you even started with WorkBlast, it seemed like you were prone to the libertarian, ideologies and viewpoints, and gold, of course. So then, Bitcoin, I'm sure, was a pretty easy sell for you also once you started to understand how it worked, and especially also the technological aspects of it. So where did the inspiration for Start9 come from after you left Salt?
Yeah, we knew, right? We didn't know what we were going to do. So I basically took, me plus the three who were ultimately the three other co-founders of Start9, and we just kind of hung out at my apartment every day. And we did some contract work to keep the money coming, right? And while we were doing, some contract work for various companies, we just talked about what we wanted to do. And the first best idea that we had was a Bitcoin derivatives exchange. We wanted to start a options and futures exchange for Bitcoin. We thought that would be very high demand. And as we went down that path and started talking to some lawyers, we realized that it was going to be the furthest thing from cypherpunk possible, right? Like we were basically going to be like the most regulated company on the planet. We'd have SEC agents in our office, and we would be, we'd have more lawyers and compliance people on the team than developers. And I, to this day, stand that if we had gone down that path, we may be the richest people around. But that's not what we wanted out of our lives. We wanted to do something more in line with, libertarian and cypherpunk principles. So we trashed that idea. And we eventually came up with what is today Start9. And the kind of anecdotal origin story there is that Lightning at this point, so this was like mid 2019, Lightning had just gone live in beta, or it's probably alpha. And it was like when the hashtag reckless was going around Twitter. Where using Lightning was legitimately reckless because you could lose money. And Keegan, who was one of the co-founders at the time, had set up his Lightning node, and was pointing it to his Bitcoin node, and he wanted to transact. He wanted to play with the Lightning network. He was very interested in it. And so he called me and was like, hey, why don't you go set up your Lightning node? And I was like, all right. So, I get on the documentation for LND, and I was like, oh my God, this is bad. Like nobody's going to be able to use this. I mean, I was fairly technical. By this point, I'm a competent engineer. And I was like, this is going to take me all weekend. And I'm always sort of seeking meta plays. So rather than setting up my Lightning node, I called Keegan and was like, we need to make this easier. Setting up a Lightning node is way too hard. Like nobody's going to do it. The network cannot possibly come into existence or survive if setting up a node is this hard. So what can we do to make setting up a Lightning node easier? For that matter, what can we do to make setting up a Bitcoin node easier? Because you need a Bitcoin node to run a Lightning node. So, and then we were like, okay, well, now we have these two things we want to make easy to set up and run. Well, if we can make these two things easy to set up and run, I bet you some of similar tactics would apply to setting up a file server, setting up a file server easy to run, or setting up a messaging server, or, just a simple web server to host a web page or a blog. And now we were interested, right? And this conversation captured everyone's interest, all four of us. We were like, oh, okay. What if we could make it easy, like really easy, for a totally normal, non-technical person to self-host any variety of open source software, effectively run their own personal server, and opt out of third-party clouds altogether, not just to run a Bitcoin node, not just to run a Lightning node, but to tell Google to take a hike, Microsoft to take a hike, Apple to take a hike, just cut big tech out of your life altogether and take total, sovereign, 100% control over all of your digital infrastructure. What if we could make that easy? How important would that be? What impacts would that have on the world? And we were like, oh, wait a second. This is literally the cypherpunk dream. This is like the holy grail of affecting politics through technology, is making personal servers easy to own and operate. And so we just became obsessed. We were like, oh, this is definitely what we need to do. And so there's a lot that happened from that moment of recognition to, initial launch, but that's where it came from.
Yeah, and it's I think the whole space is super interesting, and I think it's still relatively young, right? Like you started Start9 in 2019, and we're only 6 years later. But I think what's interesting about it, and what's also kind of stands out to me, because when I'm a Bitcoiner, and when I see a company like yours, it makes sense. It's the self-sovereign aspect of being able to run your own server, own your own data, be able to be self-sovereign over that. But I think there's a lot of people that also maybe don't recognize that there is a problem yet. And so I'm curious also from your perspective how you see that evolving, because I think more and more, right, as these technologies advance, as people put more of their lives on the internet, on these central servers, on Amazon, Google, whatever, people start to recognize that there's much more potential for dangerous things to happen, whether it's data leaks, whether it's invasions of privacy through whatever means. But I'm curious from your perspective how you see the idea or the initiative of kind of this self-sovereign computing evolving, in a sense of like, do you think it'll be a natural evolution, or do you think it's more something that people will recognize that, they can't just put their lives on these, centralized servers, let's say?
Yeah. So what does the adoption curve look like? I don't think we're unique in terms of new technology.
Mhm.
Um, any new technology is only going to survive if it is needed.
Mhm.
Um, and so if somebody had tried to do what we're doing 20 years ago, um, I don't think it could have succeeded because
Mhm.
the world was getting out of the on-prem private server and moving to the cloud, right? That was the trend. And in our view and understanding of both technology and the world, um, this was y- you could call it a mistake. I think it was kind of made sense why it happened, um,
Mhm.
but there are huge consequences to it. Okay, and these were not apparent, at least not to the plebs and not to the people of Earth, right? Some people may have understood the consequences of this, and they are the incumbent powers that liked the consequences because it gave them enormous leverage and control. Um, but I don't think people understood that they were sleepwalking into a trap. Okay,
Mhm.
and the movement of computing infrastructure to central servers in the cloud um, is extremely dangerous. It brings about four problems, and I state these all the time, and I think it's really important to keep reiterating them until everyone understands. Is you have invasion of privacy, right? So whether it's dragnet surveillance or targeted surveillance, nothing you do on a computer is private if the state doesn't want it to be, right? It's very hard to be private and to evade dragnet or targeted surveillance. Um, Number two is censorship. Again, going back to my own roots and thinkings around politics, propaganda is an essential tool of statecraft, far more powerful and pervasive than people realize. And censorship and propaganda are two sides of the same coin, right? So you need to suppress messages that go against your objective, and you need to amplify messages that accord with your objective. And that can be done very delicately and seamlessly in an opaque way using social media. Right, social media, centralized cloud-based social media is just a despot's dream. Right? If you're a dictator and you want to control the narrative, social media is the way to do it. And you don't need to overtly deplatform either. Right, all you need is algorithmic suppression and amplification of different messages, and you achieve your goal. So that's another one. A third one is cost. Right. So if you don't grow your own food, you got to buy it from somebody else, right? Restaurants are more expensive than home cooking. It's the more you involve third parties, sure, there's some convenience there. We're not against third parties, right? Like we think people should be able to provide services and goods to other people. But when you are dependent on a third party for basic needs, you're really setting yourself up for extortion. And so, while things were free at the beginning, we're seeing now it's like the hammer's dropping, everyone is very dependent on their cloud services and streaming services and everything for their lives, for their entertainment, for everything. And they can just ratchet up the prices, and there's really not much anyone can do. So,
Yeah.
we're witnessing the beginning of the extortionary squeeze them until they can't breathe phase of cloud computing. And then lastly is just security. Cloud computing is inherently insecure, right? Not because we lack, application security or conventional best practices. It's because any server that has sufficient data on it to be valuable, right, is a target. And there are people in the world, talented people who are not only developers, hackers, but who know how to socially engineer, which is how most hacking takes place, who want these servers and are willing to risk uh, their freedom and potentially even their lives to get these servers because the reward is so big. And ultimately, these servers are protected by humans, right? Every server at some layer has a sysadmin that has access to the database. And so all you have to do is identify who that person is and, bribe, blackmail, threaten, whatever you got to do to that person to get the keys, and you're in the server. So my contention is any server worth hacking will eventually be hacked. And so the bigger these centralized servers get, the more the guarantee that they will be hacked is. And you and all of us have our data on these servers. So you're not a target. Hackers don't care about you. Your data on the margin is totally worthless. But because you've put your data in a gigantic pile with everyone else's data, you're collateral damage in a cyber war that you didn't know about or opt into. And so it's just inherently insecure, and everyone's going to get hacked as a result of it, even though you're not the one being targeted. So these are the problems that we cite with cloud computing. And we believe that these problems are totally unsolvable within the cloud computing paradigm. You cannot throw more regulation, more layers of security, more benevolent politicians at it. It's inherent. Censorship, invasion of privacy, high cost, and low security are inherent in the cloud computing paradigm, which means all four of them will continue to degrade, which means eventually everyone will see it, right? As long as all four of those problems keep getting worse, yeah, there will be the last person on earth to figure it out, right? Somebody has to be first and somebody has to be last, but eventually everyone will figure it out, right? Like everyone eventually realizes that the ground is missing beneath their feet. You might have to fall to figure it out, right? But you will. And so our job is to be there waiting for people as they figure it out. And like any technology adoption curve, you have your early adopters, the people who realize the problem exists before others and who are seeking out a solution. They're literally looking for a way out, and they find us. And so long as we deliver, so long as the product and the service actually solve the problem that they're seeking to solve, they will tell people about it. And then more and more, and it snowballs, and eventually you go parabolic. And we're very early on that curve, but it's working. So I think it's going to take a long time, but I don't think we're too early. I think the world is ready for us. I think the world is ready for sovereign computing. And we're building it. We're building it faster and better than anybody else.
Yeah, and it's a super exciting product, and I think, like you mentioned, a very necessary product. I think it's, as you mentioned, you're still kind of in the beginning of that adoption curve, and I think as we start to see this, I believe, a bit of like the technological dystopia continue to evolve, where decentralized institutions will have more control. I think people will start to also see the need for more self-sovereign solutions, and I think similarly, kind of relating to Bitcoin, because, as a Bitcoiner, and I've been, Bitcoin for some years, I think obviously the whole topic also around self-custody is something that is, not easy for everybody, because maybe a lot of people don't see the need to take their Bitcoin off an exchange, and also leaving it on the exchange is the easy option. And, when you take responsibility of your own, when you buy a hardware wallet and put your Bitcoin on there, or whatever solution you decide, you're ultimately taking responsibility. And I think also that's something that's still foreign for a lot of people, because people are so used to kind of, also, as you mentioned, trusting in these centralized institutions. And so I think also with Bitcoin self-custody, how I see it evolving is like the need is going to arise more, where people start to realize like the digital property rights of owning Bitcoin on self-custody. And I think the accessibility, like I think the market will continue to innovate solutions which will make self-custody more easy to do. And so I'm curious also from your perspective, because I think, Start9 has made a leap in terms of making like a home server easy to do. It's kind of a plug and play solution. I'm curious for also a bit kind of your future vision in terms of how you see that continuing to evolve and continuing to cater to more and more people as more people start to realize that they need it.
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to share our kind of our outlook, how we, and it hasn't changed, to be honest. We understood this in late 2019 very clearly, and nothing has changed. We understood that the battleground for personal server adoption, right? What is preventing people from adopting personal servers? Was really twofold. You could kind of break each section down into more subsections, but there's really two battlegrounds for personal server adoption. Number one is convenience. It's just making it usable, right, to more and more people. So lowering the barrier to entry, the level of technical ability required, making it as easy as possible, while also not sacrificing anything, by the way, right? Like, we can make it easier, but we can't inject ourselves in the process. We cannot be a trusted third party. Like, it has to be pure, right? Running a personal server on StartOS has to be just as secure and private as running a personal server on any Linux distro or any other hand-rolled way, right? So we needed to build a convenient, easy to use product without sacrificing on principle. That was battleground one. Battleground two was education, was marketing, right? Was making people aware of the problem and of the existence of a working solution, right? So that is for personal servers. And that is still our battlegrounds. That's why I'm on this call, right? Is the second part of that is raising awareness and education. And we are still trying to make it easier, trying to make it better. And in fact, we have a StartOS 0.4.0 is in late stage testing at this point. I'm using it on my production server, as are others. We are days potentially away from going to public beta and opening this up to everyone else. It really just depends on how quickly the remaining bugs get squashed. But like, it's late. We've been working on it for a long time, but it is a massive, massive improvement on the current product. And the current product is widely upheld as the best way to run a personal server in the world today. And we just are about to come out with a version of StartOS that literally crushes this thing. Like, it makes the existing product look like a toy. It's just so much more powerful. It's even easier to use. But yeah, we're very, very excited for that. So we will continue on the convenience, user experience improvements, and on education. And word of mouth, is as always the number one driver of adoption of early stage technology. So, second to this is, where do we go from there, right? This isn't the end game. This is the starting point, right? Personal server adoption is the starting point of ending the hegemony of cloud computing on Earth, which is ultimately our goal, right? That's the starting point. So where do we go from there? Well, where did they go from there? Like, what is their plan? Like, what else is computing besides servers? Because there's more than just servers in the world. Servers are the beating heart and brain of a computing infrastructure, any computing paradigm. But there's lots of other computers, and we need them to be able to run as well, right? Like, you could be running a personal server, but if your router, your laptop, and every IoT device in your life is totally plugged into a third-party server SaaS product, then we're just as captured as before, right? Maybe a little less that you have your own server, but we really need to conquer the entire computing paradigm. And so the next logical step, and again, we knew this in 2019, the next logical step for us was to build a router. And right, so a server is kind of the brain of the operation, right? A server is what stores and processes data that can then be shared in a selective way to various devices. But how does it share data with those various devices? How do you access a server to retrieve data or post data to the server? Well, you need a network, right? Like, the electrical signals have to go through something. And the thing that controls a network is a router. So routers are the traffic controllers of the computing paradigm, right? If the server is the brain, then the routers are the traffic controllers. It's, I don't want to draw an analogy too much to the human body, but it's not a nervous system. It's what allows traffic in or out. Okay, I don't know if we have something like that in the human body, but regardless, it's very, very central to a computing paradigm. All right. And so that is what we're working on now. So we have StartOS 0.4.0 coming out, and we are very far along at this point towards our router product, which will launch in 2026. So next year, we'll be launching a router. The Start9 router will be running our own open source operating system, which is based on OpenWRT. It'll be called Start WRT. For lack of creativity, we have Start OS is our server operating system. Start WRT is our router operating system. It will be MIT licensed, and it will be under the same business model as our server. We will sell physical routers that are warrantied and supported by Start9. But you can download our free and open source router operating system and flash it to a router you already own and get the full feature set out of it and not have to do business with us at all. So it's the exact same thing we did with the server, we're now doing with the router. We think this is a very viable and scalable business model. So that's where we go next. And again, something we understood in 2019 is once we have the router, now we get to start having fun, okay? Because the server is the brain, the router is the traffic controller. Now we get to start making all the cool stuff, right? Like smart speakers and security cameras and fitness health bands that you can wear that track your heart rate and your respiration and your oxygen levels and your steps and all that stuff. We can now hook up those edge devices, these IoT devices, to the server through the router in such a way that you are 100% sovereign in the entire process. No trusted third parties whatsoever, to the point where you could have security cameras in your home or a health band on your wrist, and nobody on earth besides you even knows that the camera exists, right? You can go to the other side of the world and watch live video footage of your home in such a way that nobody knows the camera exists, let alone has the ability to record or monitor it. And it's free for life too, right? Because you've got to buy the camera, but there's nobody to charge you a monthly subscription to store its footage.
Yeah.
Because it's yours. It's ownership. It's ownership of devices. There's a reason why Amazon will sell you an Alexa for $20. It's because they don't care about the speaker. They'll take a loss on that all day long. They want they want a speaker in your home, right? There's a much bigger play at stake here. Like they are trying to infiltrate your home. And that's why everything's so cheap. But wouldn't you rather spend $100 on a smart speaker and not have Amazon in your home? Like we think everyone does, right? Our vision of the future, once people understand the problem better, which is happening rapidly at this point, is, okay, in hand A, I have a security camera for $30 that requires $10 a month to store and access your footage. That plugs directly into a Google server where any employer or someone with sufficient authorization can watch you undress. That's hand A. On hand B, we have a $200 camera that is $0 per month forever, where all the video footage is stored on your home server that you can watch from anywhere in total privacy. Which one do you want? We think we're going to crush them. Like we think that they can't even, right? They're nowhere near. Everyone chooses B, everyone. So especially if you can offer it on payment terms, like you can literally sell it for the same price, and instead of a monthly payment, you're making an installment payment on the hardware itself. Like you can use financing to match the purchasing experience of the other model, except at the end of ours, you own the damn thing. And at the end of theirs, they're just sitting in your home charging you rent forever. Like it's not that you'll own nothing and be happy. It's you'll own everything and be free. So that is our vision of computing in the future. And what's fascinating about this is a lot of people will take what I just said and just be like, hey, Matt, you just said that you're going to crush Amazon and Google in the IoT market. These are trillion-dollar companies with infinite resources and marketing and propaganda capabilities, and it's like, you're crazy. But listen, they can't do what I'm trying to do. They will never do what I just said. They can't compete. We have an asymmetric advantage here, like extremely asymmetric, which is that they have bet their lives on their position as an intermediary. These companies are built on the idea that they will sit between you and your data, that they will store it. They are never, Apple and Amazon and Google are never going to come out with a security camera that doesn't involve their servers, ever. I had someone come to my house the other day and pitch me on jellyfish lights. Are you familiar with these?
No.
Like, they're permanent lights, like Christmas lights on your house. Like, your house now has like permanent lights year round, right? It's like a construction thing. They come and they literally like, it's not like wires hanging off your house like old fashioned Christmas lights. It's like the bulbs are like built into your home. And on any given night, you can just make them a nice, gentle, glow. Or during Halloween, you can make them orange and purple. And on Christmas, you can turn on all the Christmas lights. So your house is just like permanently lit up, and they're very pretty. Like they're cool. I love the idea. And my question for the guy was, okay, I'm interested. How do I control the lights? How do I change the color? I was like, I assume you have like an app, right? And he's like, yeah, you download our app. And I was like, okay, so I download your app, and then it connects to my Wi-Fi, and I control it over the local Wi-Fi network, or is it Bluetooth or what? He's like, no. You log in and you control it from there. You can control it from the web, or you can control it from your web app. It's like super convenient. And I was just like, wait a second. To control my lights in my home, I need to make a request out to your server, which then calls my lights and tells them to change color. I was like, that means you could change my lights. I was like, your company could change the color of my lights. And he was like, whoa, we wouldn't do that. And I was like, dude, I'm like joking with you a little bit, but like, no, this is absurd. Like, there's no way that I'm going down that path. Like, this isn't like locks on your door or security cameras where when a third party has access, it's like dangerous potentially, right? Or highly invasive and degrading. But this is just lights on the outside of my house. But the same principle applies. It's like, this makes no sense. These things are here. And if I want to control them remotely, I would love that ability. But I would need some kind of server in my home that could then work through a router that connects to the lights that allows me to control the lights remotely. So yes, I want lights on the outside of my house, but not until Start9 makes them, right? It's like, when Start9 lights, when Start9 house light. And super low on the priority list, of course, but also we don't need to be the ones to make it, right? Like, any protocol compliant light system could be invented and sold by any company in the world, and part of their sales would be like, oh yeah, this works through a Start9 server, it works through this thing. Like, we're inventing kind of a new standard for home IoT. Now, there obviously are already existing standards that we will need to be compliant with like the actual communication protocols. From like Zigbee to Wi-Fi, we need to be compliant with these types of home networking technologies. But we're talking about the server aspect, the ability to go to the other side of the world and change the lights on my home in such a way that nobody but me can do that. So anyway, that's where we're going. Companies like this jellyfish company, their whole model is not built on selling you the lights. Their whole model is on intermediating the data. They want to see who changes their lights to what colors at what time during the year, right? That helps their product development. It's like, oh, then now the next year they can come to my house and be like, 30% of our customers, have their lights that are yellowish for 80% of the year, but on Halloween, the most popular configuration is this one. And not only that, we can turn it into a social network where everyone can now share their home light settings on a social, like, that's their pitch to VCs. That's how they're raising money. They're not just selling you lights. They're selling you a community, a lifestyle, and it's all through them. And I hate it. I think it's disgusting, degrading, unsustainable, expensive, insecure, stupid, and we are going to crush them. And they will never try to do what we do. Google will never try to do what we do. because it's antithetical to their entire existence. So yes, I think we can compete with the largest, most powerful technology companies that have ever existed. I think we can compete.
I love that. That whole vision and outline that you just gave, I think is incredibly inspiring. And I think it's exactly kind of the future, the vision of the future that we need, right? Because like you said, I think putting back the power in individuals' hands and being able to own the data, being able to own the experience and privacy and all these, fundamental things that I think we have also lost over the past few years through these, big conglomerates. And I think, going back to what we talked about, it's still early. I think, just hearing your vision of Start9, not only as kind of the server company and be able to have a home server, but as using that as a foundation to build other products to scale the ecosystem. And I think, it's a solution that's desperately needed. And I'm excited also to, follow that from my end, because I think it's something that I need more and more. And I think also the accessibility of these solutions, because I think the more easy they become to use, the more obvious they become to use, I think the more adoption will come also. And I think, as someone who's a Bitcoiner, someone who likes to, especially Bitcoin also has changed me a lot as a person in terms of self-sovereignty and wanting to take control of things in my life. I think hearing products like this is kind of the future that we need, right? Because the way I see it right now, we kind of have two paths. One's is towards this like technological dystopia where all these centralized companies have your data and essentially have control, versus the vision that Start9 has, which is the self-sovereign way, being able to own your data, own your infrastructure, I think it's incredibly inspiring. So,
Thanks.
so I'm excited to follow along, and I know we're running short on time here. So, given all of your expertise through technology, through Bitcoin, and through now Start9, and all the experiences that we just talked about, I try to also gear my show a bit towards beginners who are coming into the space. And I think a lot of times, especially because it's such a new space, it can be overwhelming, and there can be a lot of different directions that you could go. So my final question for you is, what advice would you have for any newcomers coming into Bitcoin, but also into kind of this sovereign individual, sovereign computing space, if you will, also?
Um, yeah. It's a lot. I think people want to simplify it. They want it to be simple. And that's because simple is easy, I guess. People are busy. But most of the reason that people dismiss Bitcoin or something like Start9 is because they just haven't looked hard enough. They haven't put in the work to really see what's been said and listen to podcasts and read some books and think about it intentionally, like actually just sit there and think. And so what happens is you can get discouraged. It kind of sounds crazy and you hear some things and you just go, I don't have time for this. This sounds nuts. And you can kind of get frustrated and walk away. So I think if people understood that right out of the gate, the number one mentality that you should come into this with is that you're running a marathon. Like, don't come into it thinking that it's a 5K. This is not a 3-mile race. Like, if you come into it with the mentality that it's a marathon, that it's going to take a long time, and that it's going to be really, really challenging, then you won't be surprised and you won't get discouraged. You'll be like, oh, I'm at mile 12. I'm exhausted. This is extremely challenging, but that's okay because that's what it is, right? What can be very discouraging is if you think you're going to understand it and be like competent and ready to do things in 2 days, and a week later you're just like, you didn't realize you were signing up for a marathon, then you rage quit. You just kind of walk away, and that would be detrimental, right? Not understanding Bitcoin, not understanding the nature of Earth's communications infrastructure and cloud computing can hurt you, right? Like these are important things to understand. Just like running and exercising is good for your health, even though they're challenging and even though they require perseverance and commitment. It's recognizing that it's important and challenging. And if you come into it with the right mindset, then you will acquire tools that will help you flourish, and you will do it in a way that does not make you insanely angry. So mindset is everything. Don't oversimplify it. Give it the respect it deserves, and be patient with yourself. And hopefully you'll come out of it with a better understanding of how things work, and therefore a better ability to navigate it for yourself and for your children and their children. A little corny, but yeah,
No.
I think that's true.
I mean, I think oftentimes the things that contain the most wisdom can sound corny, but I think what you just said is very important, and I think it relates to also a lot of your personality and your aspects of life, and I think it's really important advice for anybody in the space. So, Matt, I really appreciate you coming on the show. Where can my listeners find more about what it is that you're doing and Start9 as well?
Start9.com is a great starting place and resource. We have links for our social media. We have links for contacting us, learning more about Start9. We have links to all of our code, which is all open source. So yeah, we're not hard to get a hold of. We're very available and responsive if you have questions. And it's probably easier than you're imagining. Like if you are considering doing a personal server to run a Bitcoin node or host your own files or host your own messenger, it is definitely easier than you're imagining that it is. And you should, give it a try. We're here to help, and we're here to help. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate that very much, Matt. And I'll, of course, link Start9 and your profile also in the show notes so my listeners can directly check that out. Really appreciate the time today. I also learned a lot, and I'm sure my listeners will as well. So thanks for your time.
I appreciate having me. Thanks. Okay.